Welcome to Sleep Theater Radio, where we bring you immersive tales accompanied by the gentle sounds of rain and distant thunder. Tonight's story takes us into the fog-choked streets of Brasshaven, where a band of masked vigilantes known as the Iron Watch face a shadowy enemy threatening to unravel their city. In this epic steampunk fantasy, trust is scarce, rust spreads in the dark, and even heroes wear masks. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more adventures to drift away to. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let the rain carry you into the world of the Iron Watch, Veil of Rust. Chapter 1, League of Smoke. The city was always dying. Brasshaven's skyline was a jagged saw of iron scaffolds and soot-stained domes, split by the twisting pipes of the steam quarter and the jagged teeth of the gearworks district. At night, the smog glowed orange under the gas lamps as if the air itself were on fire. Somewhere deep in its rusting heart, a whistle screamed, a factory shift ending or beginning. To Elias Vane, it was all the same. He moved along the rooftop like a shadow bleeding into the fog. The ferrymen, they still called him that, though he'd hung up the mask years ago, hadn't been in this part of the city since he swore he was done with the Iron Watch. The coat was the same, the boots too. But the plague mask that had once given his name weight in the Undercity, that was gone, replaced by nothing but the grim lines of his face. He didn't need the mask tonight. He wasn't hunting. He was here because someone was killing his old friends. 2 nights ago, they found Iron Hound in the dry dock of Pier 6, the steel plates of his armor pried open with surgical precision. The newspapers called it a tragic accident during a demonstration. The Iron Watch knew better. They always knew better. The Watch had been more than a band of vigilantes. They'd been a council, a shadow cabinet keeping the city's corruption from spilling completely over its walls. They weren't saints. They weren't even always good. But they had rules, lines, and someone was crossing them. Elias stopped at the edge of the rooftop, crouching low. Below, Brasshaven's central plaza was crawling with carriages, steam trams, and people in oil-stained coats. Lady Dynamo's rally was in full swing, her voice cutting through the roar of the crowd. And if the city assembly will not protect its citizens from the hands that strangle them, then the Iron Watch will. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing between the brass-plated buildings. Dynamo, real name Mirabelle Holst, stood on a raised platform, her electric gauntlets gleaming under the lamps. To the public, she was the Watch's most visible face. To Elias, she was a reckless firebrand, the kind who burned allies along with enemies. He scanned the rooftops opposite, eyes narrowing. He wasn't here to listen to speeches. He was here to find the shooter. The first shot rang out as a muffled thump swallowed by the city's din. Dynamo froze mid-sentence. A second later, one of her guards crumpled, steam hissing from the bullet hole in his chest plate. The crowd screamed. Elias was already moving. He leapt the gap to the opposite roof, boots hitting wet iron with a clang. The shooter was a silhouette against the glow of the smog, long coat, wide brim hat, and a gleaming rifle with a telescopic clockwork scope. The ferryman drew his revolver, a relic from another life. The shooter swung the rifle toward him, but Elias fired first. The bullet clipped the scope, shattering it in a burst of glass and brass. The figure cursed, a woman's voice, and bolted, disappearing into the maze of gears and chimneys. Elias gave chase. They moved like rats through the gearworks, steam hissing from vents, chains swinging from overhead pulleys. She was fast, vaulting over crates and ducking under piston arms with the reflex of someone who'd run these rooftops before. Elias almost lost her in the steam cloud from a ruptured pipe, but he caught the glint of brass on her coat, a pin, shaped like a spoked gear. He knew that symbol. Everyone in the Watch did. The Iron Ministry. By the time he reached the street, she was gone. All that remained was the pin lying on the cobblestones like bait. Elias picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm. The Ministry wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The Watch had dismantled them years ago, scattering their leadership into the wind. But if they were back, if they'd infiltrated the city again, then the Iron Watch wasn't just being hunted. They were being dismantled. And the ferryman had just been dragged back into the river. Chapter 2, Masks in the Fog. The tavern smelled of coal smoke, old ale, and secrets. The Crow's gear had been a haunt for the Iron Watch long before Elias left the League, long before they started dying. In the back room, the brass lamp flickered, throwing shadows across the faces of the surviving members. Lady Dynamo sat at the far end of the table, her gauntlets resting beside a half-empty glass. The faint ozone tang of her equipment lingered in the air. She hadn't changed since the rally, her jaw set like she could bite through steel. On her right sat Cogshade, his goggles pushed up on his forehead, leaving deep red grooves in the skin. A small clockwork bird sat on his shoulder, whirring quietly as its head turned toward each speaker in turn. Black Pike stood by the window, arms folded, his expression hidden under the brim of his hat. He'd been the Watch's hammer, the one they sent when subtlety failed. Rumor was subtlety had been failing more often lately. Wraith Glass was missing. She'd been missing for weeks. Elias stayed standing, his back to the wall. He'd been gone for years, but the others didn't ask why he was back. They already knew. "We all saw what happened at the rally," Dynamo said, her voice sharp. "That wasn't random. The Ministry is moving openly again." "Assuming it was the Ministry," Cogshade replied, adjusting a gear on his bird's wing. "That symbol could have been planted. If they are back, they'd hide deeper. They'd what?" Elias cut in. "Hide while they pick us off one by one? Hound's dead. The shooter came for you next. If that's not the Ministry, then it's someone who knows us well enough to wear their skin." Black Pike stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "If it is them," he said, "we find them. We cut the head off the gear, same as last time." Elias shook his head. "Last time we didn't finish the job. We dismantled their machines, scattered their captains. But the Ministry wasn't built on machines, it was built on ideas. And ideas don't rust." The room went quiet. Outside, a tram rattled by, steam hissing through the cracks in the shutters. Finally, Dynamo spoke again. "Then we go hunting. All of us. Tonight." Elias's gut tightened. That was Dynamo's way. Charge in, fists first, questions later. "No," he said. "We start with information. I chased the shooter into the gearworks. She knew the routes, knew where to lose me. If she's Ministry, she's got ties in the Machinists' Guild." Cogshade nodded slowly. "The Guild's archives might have her name, but they're locked tighter than a minister's wallet." "That's why we don't knock," Elias said. They broke up the meeting without ceremony. Dynamo stormed out into the fog. Black Pike followed her like a shadow. Cogshade lingered just long enough to press a small brass token into Elias's palm. "For the archives," Cogshade said. "Old access code, from before you left." Elias pocketed it, his mind already on the night ahead. If the Ministry was truly back, the Iron Watch would have to dig deeper than ever before. But the deeper they dug, the closer they'd get to the rust at the heart of their own masks. And rust, once it starts, never stops spreading. Chapter 3, Blood on Brass. The Machinists' Guild Hall loomed like a fortress in the center of the gearworks. Massive iron doors barred the front, their surfaces etched with the names of every guildmaster for the past century. At night, the glow of the furnace towers turned the rain-slick street into rivers of molten gold. Elias crouched in the shadow of a water tower, watching the front entrance. Steam rolled from venting pipes, hissing in the cold air. Cogshade knelt beside him, fingers working the controls of a brass spider automaton that clung to the parapet, its jeweled eyes glinting. "You're sure she's inside?" Elias asked. Cogshade's lips curled into a humorless smile. "I'd bet both my lungs on it. My little friend caught her slipping in through the service door 10 minutes ago. We can wait for her to come out, or we can flush her." Elias didn't hesitate. "Flush her." They moved fast. The service door wasn't guarded. The guild believed in locks more than people. Elias slipped the access token Cogshade had given him into the panel. Gears whirred, tumblers clicked, and the door swung inward with a groan. Inside, the smell of hot oil and old iron wrapped around them. Great walls of brass cabinets lined the corridor, each drawer labeled in neat mechanical script. Records, names, transactions. If the ministry had wormed its way back into the guild, the proof would be in here. They didn't have time to look. A scream split the air, high and sudden, somewhere deeper in the building. Elias ran toward it, boots striking sparks on the metal grating. Cogshade followed, his mechanical bird now circling overhead like a watchful hawk. They found her in the archive room, the shooter from the rally, standing over the crumpled body of a guild clerk. The floor was slick with blood, pooling beneath the man's head. She still held the knife. Her eyes flicked from Elias to the door behind them. No words, just motion. She bolted, shoving a drawer's worth of documents into a satchel as she ran. Elias gave chase, weaving through the maze of shelves. Cogshade's bird dove, snapping its metal beak at her head, forcing her to duck. Elias lunged, catching her coat, and she spun, slashing with the knife. The blade glanced off his coat's reinforced panel, but the force still staggered him. She didn't get away. Elias slammed her against a cabinet, the knife clattering to the floor. But before he could ask a single question, she spat a mouthful of something metallic, and smoke exploded between them. When it cleared, she was gone. Cogshade swore under his breath, scooping up the satchel she'd dropped in the chaos. At least she left us a gift. Elias looked down at the dead clerk, the blood already turning dark in the lamplight. The ministry had made its move. And now, Elias knew, they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way, even if that meant killing half the city to do it. Chapter 4, Shadows in the Cogs. The Machinists' Guild Hall was sealed by morning. City watchmen in brass-trimmed uniforms stood guard at the doors, their faces pale in the smog-thinned daylight. Elias and Cogshade had slipped out the night before, unnoticed, but the clerk's murder was already on every front page. Guild official murdered in apparent robbery documents stolen from archives. Elias tossed the crumpled paper onto the tavern table. Dynamo stared at it for a long moment, her jaw tight. "They're framing us," she said. "They don't have to," Elias replied. "The ministry will feed them the story they want, and the papers will print it gladly." Black Pike leaned forward, the leather of his coat creaking. "Then we hit back," he said. "Send a message." Elias shook his head. "We can't. Not until we know what was in those documents. If they went to the trouble of killing for them, they weren't just payroll records." That night, they went to the one place in Brasshaven where information flowed freer than oil. The Cogworks, a sprawling industrial warren beneath the city. It was here that the ministry had once built its war machines. It was here that the Watch had dismantled them. Now, the Cogworks was alive again. Steam hissed from venting pistons. Great gear wheels turned overhead, and iron catwalks stretched into darkness. Shadows moved along the walkways, workers, smugglers, and the kind of people who traded in whispers. Elias moved through the crowd, his plague mask drawing wary glances. Cogshade followed, mechanical bird perched on his shoulder. They were looking for a man called Bram, a fixer with a knack for getting things he shouldn't. They found him leaning against a gear housing the size of a carriage, puffing a cigar that stank of cheap tar. "Ferryman," Bram said, smiling without warmth. "Didn't think you still breathed." "Tell me about the ministry," Elias said. Bram chuckled, blowing smoke through the slats of the gear. "Tell you?" he said. "I can show you." He nodded toward the far end of the catwalk, where a massive iron gate shuttered open. Through it came a train. Not the city's standard tram, but a sleek, armored machine, its hull painted black, its windows shuttered. Ministry markings gleamed faintly on its side. It didn't stop for passengers. It didn't need to. Bram's voice was low, almost reverent. "Every week, they run one of those from the docks to the upper foundry. No one sees what's inside. No one comes near it. The ones who do don't walk away." Elias's gaze followed the train as it vanished into the darkness. If the ministry was moving something that's secret, that heavily guarded, then the stolen documents were part of something much bigger than assassination. And he had the sinking feeling the Iron Watch had just stepped onto the tracks. Chapter 5, The Iron Ministry. The first explosion rattled the windows of Brasshaven's east quarter. The second turned the morning sky black with smoke. Elias stood at the edge of Marlowe Street, watching flames crawl up the side of the Parliament Annex. Bells were ringing across the city, steam trams halted mid-track, and the streets were choked with panicked civilians. This wasn't just an attack. It was a message. Lady Dynamo was already in the thick of it, gauntlets sparking as she directed bucket brigades and pulled trapped clerks from the wreckage. Black Pike paced the perimeter like a caged wolf, his eyes scanning for threats. Cogshade's bird darted above the smoke, returning with sharp metallic chirps. "They planned this," Elias said, his voice muffled behind the plague mask. "Timed it for when the annex was full. They wanted witnesses." Dynamo didn't look up from the rubble. "Then let's make sure they regret it." The ministry didn't wait for the fire to burn out. From the far end of the boulevard, a column of black-coated figures appeared, moving in perfect step. Each wore a gear-shaped badge on their lapel, their faces hidden behind smoked goggles. At their head was a man in a polished brass breastplate and long coat, his hat tilted low. Elias recognized him instantly. Marek Vale, former ministry strategist, thought to be dead since the last war. Vale stopped just short of the cordon, lifting a speaking horn to his mouth. "The Iron Watch," his voice boomed. "Once, the city's guardians, now its saboteurs. Today, you murdered 15 of Brasshaven's loyal servants. You burned their work to the ground." The crowd turned, eyes darting between Vale and the Watch. Doubt spread like a stain. Elias stepped forward. "You planted the charges, Vale. You've been planting bodies for weeks." Vale smiled thinly. "The city believes what it sees, and today it sees you standing in the ashes." Gunfire cracked. The ministry's front line opened fire, their rifles spitting bursts of steam-propelled slugs. Dynamo's gauntlets flared, deflecting shots into the cobblestones. Pike dove into the crowd, his hidden blades flashing silver. Cogshade's bird dove like a steel arrow, wrenching a rifle from one man's hands. Elias fired twice, the recoil jolting up his arm. Ministry agents fell, but Vale was already retreating into the smoke. By the time the fight ended, the street was littered with broken glass, spent cartridges, and the smell of scorched oil. The Watch had won the clash, but not the crowd. Somewhere, in the papers tomorrow, the headline was already being written. "Iron Watch strikes at City. Parliament flames." Chapter 6, Fractured Alliances. The smoke from the Parliament Annex still hung over Brasshaven the next morning, settling low in the streets like a reminder of failure. Inside the Crow's Gear Tavern, the Iron Watch argued. They cheered for him, Lady Dynamo said, pacing like a storm caged in a brass box. Vale walked out of that firestorm, and the people acted like he was the one pulling them from the wreckage. Black Pike slammed a knife into the table, the blade quivering in the wood. We should have chased him down last night. Finished it. Elias leaned against the wall, arms folded. We couldn't, not without cutting down half the civilians in our way. He knew we'd hold back. That's why he made it public. Cogshade said nothing at first. His bird, perched on a chair, gave a sharp mechanical click. The real question, he said at last, is how he knew exactly where we'd be. Either Vale has the city mapped down to the last cobblestone, or someone's feeding him our movements. The room fell silent. Wraithglass emerged from the shadows near the bar. She hadn't been at the battle, or so she claimed. "You're looking at me like I slit the Parliament's throat myself," she said coolly. "No," Pike growled. "I'm looking at you like you were the one who disappeared for 3 weeks right before the Ministry returned." Dynamo's gauntlets sparked. "We don't have time for this," she snapped. "If there's a traitor in the Watch, we deal with it after Vale's in the ground." Elias's gaze didn't leave Wraithglass. She met it without flinching. "You can follow me if you like, Ferryman," she said, "but you'll find I'm chasing the same ghosts you are." By nightfall, the Watch had split. Dynamo and Pike moved to hunt Vale directly, ignoring Elias's warnings about walking into a trap. Wraithglass vanished into the alleyways, her destination unspoken. That left Elias and Cogshade to pick through the Ministry's trail alone. The ferryman tightened the straps of his mask. "We're bleeding from the inside, Cogshade," he said quietly, "and if we don't close the wound, Vale won't have to kill us." Cogshade's bird clicked again, as if in agreement. Chapter 7. Through the Cogworks. The Cogworks was never meant for human hands. It was a labyrinth of moving pistons, churning gears, and pressurized steam vents, the underbelly of Brasshaven's industrial heart. To step into it was to accept that at any moment, the city might chew you up and spit you into the slag pits. Elias led the way, his boots clanging against the narrow iron walkway. Below, molten metal poured from a crucible into a waiting mold, the heat rising in waves. Cogshade followed close, his mechanical bird weaving between pipes, its glowing eyes scouting ahead. "Vault entrance should be 3 levels down," Cogshade said over the hiss of steam. "If Vale's keeping anything important, it's down there." "And the guards?" Elias asked. You'll know them when they kill you." They found the first patrol halfway to the lower decks. Ministry agents in reinforced leather and brass faceplates, their rifles fitted with steam valves that hissed with every shot. The air filled with the sharp tang of burning oil as bullets sparked off the catwalk rails. Elias fired twice, dropping the lead agent. Cogshade released a small brass sphere from his belt. It burst in a cloud of metallic dust, clogging the rifle's steam vents. The remaining agents went down fast. When the noise faded, they pressed on, deeper into the cogworks. At last, they reached it, a massive iron vault door set into the wall like the mouth of some sleeping beast. The outer casing was engraved with the Ministry's gear insignia, and the air here was colder, as if the metal itself was holding its breath. Cogshade knelt by the lock, pulling a nest of clockwork picks from his coat. "Keep watch. This'll take a while." But Elias was already looking past the vault. Through the steam, faint footsteps echoed from the walkway above. He glanced up and froze. Standing there watching them was Wraithglass. She didn't speak, didn't move, just turned and vanished into the shadows. Elias's stomach tightened. Whether she was leading them deeper into the truth or straight into Vale's jaws, he couldn't tell. Chapter 8, The Machine's Heart. The vault door groaned as its gears disengaged, the sound reverberating through the cogworks like the turning of some ancient colossus. When it finally swung open, a wash of cold air spilled out. Not the damp chill of stone, but the metallic cold of precision machinery. Inside, the room was unlike anything Elias had seen. A vast chamber of polished brass and steel, its floor dominated by a single massive construct. A cylinder the size of a tram engine, covered in gearwork, pressure gauges, and copper cabling. Cogshade stepped forward, eyes wide. This isn't a weapon. It's a processor. A what? Elias asked. Calculates patterns, predicts outcomes. If Vale has this tied into the city's network, he can anticipate troop movements, trade routes, even public unrest. He can play the city like an instrument. They moved closer, the mechanical bird flitting overhead to capture every angle. Symbols were etched into the machine's housing. Not decorative, but operational markings in the ministry's private code. Cogshade ran his fingers over them. It's running a model right now, he murmured. Something about resource allocation and targeted strikes. Before Elias could respond, the chamber's far doors slammed open. Merrick Vale strode in, flanked by 4 heavily armed agents. His brass breastplate gleamed in the lamplight, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I wondered how long it would take you to find my heart, he said. Unfortunately, Ferryman, you won't live to see it stop beating. Gunfire erupted. Elias dove behind a bank of copper pipes, firing back. Cogshade ducked beneath the machine's bulk, working frantically at a control panel. One agent went down to a shot from Elias, another fell screaming as the mechanical bird tore at his faceplate. Vale didn't flinch. He advanced slowly, firing measured shots, his aim impossibly precise. Then the machine behind them hissed. A warning vent. Cogshade yelled, Elias, if I can overload it, we can wipe his whole operation in one blast. Do it, Elias growled. Vale smiled coldly. You'd burn half the city to stop me? Elias leveled his revolver. If that's what it takes. Chapter 9, The Devil's Bargain. The machine's core pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a mechanical heart refusing to die. Vale stood across from Elias, gun in hand, his agents closing in from the sides. You've seen what it can do, Vale said, his voice almost gentle now. With this processor, I can make the city run without corruption. Every crime predicted before it's committed, every riot ended before it begins. Perfect order. Elias's grip tightened on his revolver. Perfect control, you mean? You're not saving the city, you're owning it. Vale smirked. And what are you doing, Ferryman? Stumbling through alleys, hoping you can save a handful of lives before the rot swallows the rest? We're not so different, except I have the tools to finish the job. Behind Elias, Cogshade hissed through his teeth, still working the controls. I can overload it, but if I do, half this sector goes with it. You, me, everyone in this room. No coming back from that. Lady Dynamo's voice crackled over the small brass communicator at Elias's belt. We've got Vale's reinforcements tied up topside, but not for long. Make your call. Elias glanced at Wraithglass, who had slipped into the chamber like a shadow. She met his gaze, unreadable. Then she spoke, for the first time since their split. Vale's lying about control. The Ministry doesn't plan to stop at Brasshaven. This processor is the first of many. Destroy it and you might slow them down, but you'll die here. Vale took a step forward, lowering his gun slightly. Or you could walk away. Join me. Keep your precious watch alive. Be the city's hound instead of its ghost. The words hung heavy in the steam-thick air. For a moment, Elias saw it. The watch alive, the city calm, the chaos gone. But then he thought of Ironhound's body at Pier 6, the Parliament burning, and the way Val's men had marched in formation through the streets. Order built on chains. He raised his revolver. No deal. Cogshade hit the final lever. The chamber erupted in a roar of steam and tearing metal as the processor's core overloaded. Vale's agents were thrown back in a spray of shrapnel. Wraithglass yanked Elias behind a console as the machine's massive gears snapped loose. The last thing Elias saw where the fire consumed the room was Vale's brass breastplate glinting in the blaze, and his smile unbroken. Chapter 10, The Final Turn of the Screw. Brasshaven burned. The cogworks vented smoke into the night sky like a wounded beast, the glow of molten fire painting the clouds red. The blast from the processor's destruction had ripped through the lower sector, collapsing catwalks and shattering steam lines. Elias crawled out from a pile of twisted pipework, coughing through his mask filters. Cogshade emerged a moment later, his coat singed, the mechanical bird missing half a wing. Wraithglass was nowhere in sight. From the smoke, a figure limped forward, Marek Vale. His brass armor was cracked and blackened, his hat gone, but his eyes burned with the same cold fury. "You think you've won?" Vale rasped. "The Ministry doesn't die here. I don't die here." Elias raised his revolver, but Vale was faster, the shot grazing Elias's shoulder and spinning him back. Cogshade lunged forward, swinging a length of broken pipe. The blow knocked Vale off balance, sending him crashing against a half-melted gear assembly. They struggled, Vale's gauntleted hands gripping Elias's coat, forcing him toward the molten pit below. Steam hissed from ruptured lines, scalding the air. "Brasshaven needs me." Vale snarled. "Without me, chaos will eat this city alive." Elias drove his elbow into Vale's side, then let it choke. With a final push, he sent Vale over the edge. The brass armor hit the molten slag with a hiss like a dying serpent, and was gone. The fight was over, but the city above was still in chaos. The Ministry's agents scattered, their coordination broken without Vale's orders. But the damage to Brasshaven was done. Streets cracked from the underground shock, and people already whispering about the Watch's role in the destruction. Lady Dynamo found them hours later in a hidden rail tunnel. Pike was with her, blood on his coat but still standing. No one spoke of victory. They walked into the night, their silhouettes swallowed by the steam and shadows. Brasshaven still needed watching, but the watch was smaller and the rust had spread. Epilogue echoes in the steam. Winter settled over Brasshaven, the fog heavier now, the streets colder. The Parliament Annex was still a gutted ruin, cordoned off with iron barricades and guarded by city watchmen who avoided meeting each other's eyes. The Iron Watch had gone to ground. In the hidden room above the Crow's Gear Tavern, Elias sat by the window, watching frost creep across the glass. His revolver lay disassembled on the table, cleaned and oiled for the third time that night. Dynamo came in without knocking, the scent of engine grease and ozone following her. "Vale's gone," she said. "We burned him down to the bones, but the Ministry's not dead. They've started moving in the eastern quarter. Quiet, for now." Elias nodded, eyes still on the street. "They'll be back in the open soon enough." Black Pike sat in the corner, sharpening his knives. "We're fewer now," he muttered, "and the city's looking at us like we're the villains." "That's not new," Cogshade said, tinkering with his half-repaired mechanical bird. It gave a faint click, as if agreeing. From the shadows near the door, Wraithglass spoke. "The Ministry has other leaders. Vale was just the one you could see. Next time, they won't come for you in the open." Elias finally looked away from the frost. "Then we keep watching. Rust spreads faster when no one's looking." Outside, the steam rising from the street, grates caught the lamplight, curling into shapes that looked almost human before fading into the fog. Somewhere deep in the city, a gear turned and another plan began. The Iron Watch would be there when it did. You've been listening to the Iron Watch Veil of Rust, a sleep theater radio story. In the city of Brasshaven, Rust never sleeps. and neither do the memories of heroes who tried to hold the line. If this story carried you away tonight, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating more worlds of sound, story, and imagination. Sleep Theater Radio is home to original fantasy, sci-fi, and mystery tales, each crafted to help you unwind, relax, and dream deeply. So settle in, let the rain fall, and drift toward another night's rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and thank you for listening.